Hello and welcome to the programme which brings together leading commentators in the UK with the journalists from overseas who write, blog and broadcast from the Dateline London. This week, as this country marks the 70-year-long reign of Queen Elizabeth, what future for queens and kings here and globally? From King Mswati, who's used his absolute power to rename his country Eswatini, to the imperial family of Japan, gods made mortal by an occupying power. From the often absent Thai monarch to King Felipe of Spain, embarrassed by his dad. In the studio this Jubilee weekend are Catherine Pepinster, whose new book, Defenders of the Faith, addresses one of the reasons this Queen does not contemplate retirement, her faith. Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, British columnist who is a committed Republican, and Henry Chu from the LA Times in the United States, a country formed in revolt from the then English monarch. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for coming in, particularly on such a busy weekend. Catherine, can I start with you? There's no doubt that this weekend feels like a very public affirmation of this Queen. But is it also consciously, do you think, from the monarchy's side at least, a moment of transition?
It does feel like that. It's been feeling like that for a while now. We saw the Prince of Wales represent his mother at the state opening of Parliament, another major occasion, and this one too. So I think transition is a good word for it. But it's not, he's not being a replacement. He's representing her. And I'm intrigued that there hasn't been a suggestion of there being a regency. I think
in other words, when the monarch continues, but because they are no longer able to carry out their duties to the same level, the person who's due to succeed when they die fills in for them.
Exactly. Part of that might be because everybody feels, the Queen herself particularly, that she's not completely incapacitated, as happened, for example, with George III, when he was seriously ill, and the person who became eventually George IV, his son and heir, became the Prince Regent. So they haven't gone down that path at the moment.
But perhaps they also remember the history of it, because he wasn't a terribly popular figure when he was regent, was he?
No, he was not. And in those days, the monarch had more political power, and he didn't use it in ways that were particularly impressive. But I think it's also to do with the fact that this Queen has this very strong sense that she signed up to this for life, and so I think there's possibly an unwillingness to stand down. But we may yet see that happen. We may yet see a regency act.
Because nobody can know at this stage how her health may change over the coming months and years.
I find that so interesting, only because, Catherine, knowing that you were an editor of a Catholic publication probably 10 years ago, we would have said, a pope resign? No, he's in it for life, and yet that happened. And so never say never in these situations where we're in uncharted waters for a monarch to be this old, really, and having been on the throne this long, and what happens next. It's really hard to say.
Interestingly, the Queen will be well aware of how Queen Victoria disappeared from view for quite some time after the death of her husband, Prince Albert, and became very unpopular. And it was only when she had her golden and diamond jubilees, the other monarch that reigned a very long time, that she came out for those, and she was popular again. So I guess this Queen knows the importance of what she phrases as being seen to be believed.
Which raises, in a sense, the unspoken part of all this weekend's events, doesn't it, Yasmin, which is the nervousness, perhaps, that this could be a moment when the Queen dies in the coming years, where people start saying, do we want to hang around with this institution any longer? So in a sense, that, just as with Queen Victoria, the big pomp and circumstance celebration restored the monarchy to a certain extent.
I think, by the way, I'm wearing in case viewers are worried.
Yes, you haven't been attacked by a monarch.
I haven't been attacked. I had a fall and I've broken some bones, so sorry for the clumsy look. I think one has to remember not to overstate the popularity even of the Queen, because recent surveys have shown, like in almost every other major issue, this is a country now divided. Sometimes it's showing 49, whatever it is, 52. Sometimes it's showing, but there is much more of a sense, I think, that after this Queen dies, and I respect her because she's old and also because she's been through the most astonishing history.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think one shouldn't overstate that this is a totally inclusive, 100% joyous jubilee, especially coming at this time when there are so many people with economic, feeling economically insecure.
An anachronism for you then?
I think it's very insensitive. I wouldn't have gone so big at a time like this. And a lot of people are saying that. A lot of people are saying that.
And when you say anachronism, that brings that's a reflection of time. And I think what the surveys that you were referring to, Yasmin, show that it's also a generational thing.
Yeah.
That support for the monarchy as an institution is less amongst young people, and that's not just here in Britain, but in other realms where she technically reigns as well.
I'm interested what the attitude is in the United States, because the networks are going big on this, on the television networks. Is that generational difference marked to them? Because I mean, one of the little known bits of the early development of the US, which I didn't know about until Steve Richards on this program pointed it out a while ago, was that at one point some of the founders of the United States contemplated getting that rather unlucky figure from British monarchical history, Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was not very bonny and certainly not very successful in his time, having fled Scotland after the defeat at Culloden, getting him to be their king.
Yeah, I think in the U.S. actually there's a fascination with the royalty, with royal family here that actually transcends generations. In part because they're not our royal family. I mean, it's not about whether we're having them as our kings and queens
or having to pay for them.
Correct. I do find it mystifying sometimes, the fawning coverage that our networks give to a family that I feel like I need to remind my fellow Americans their oppressive yoke was what we threw off nearly 250 years ago, and yet there is this real obsession with them. I think, though, therein also lies the answer for why there is this fascination, and that's because we are still relatively a young country compared to European nations. Many of our institutions obviously pale on the timeline in comparison to the monarchy here, which is over 1,000 years. We read about and study as children King John and the Magna Carta and realize that actually is a direct line to our Declaration of Independence. And so there is that cultural affinity between the U.S. And Britain that I think helps explain this. And also, it is a soap opera, and I come from a city where we manufacture dreams and myths, Hollywood, and this is part of that.
But Henry, from what I hear from my American friends, the way the Meghan story has really affected Americans. I mean, a lot of them feel a lot of sympathy.
The young mixed-race American actress who marries into the British royal family, and it doesn't go well. It
doesn't, well, yeah, and very unfairly treated, I think.
Sorry, it sounds like I was writing a plot synopsis.
But it is a soap opera, but it's very, very interesting because I've written for the American press about this. In fact, I wrote before they married that the only way they'll survive this family and this country is if they leave. This was in Time, the cover story in the Time. But I think the Meghan thing has really woken up people. They were kind of pie-eyed about the crown and the glory and the pomp, which everybody loves. Everybody loves that. I think the Meghan thing has made a difference.
Well, it's interesting you say it's made a difference, and I think it is a blow for the royal family that didn't work, because it was effectively an innovation, wasn't it? Yeah. To have this mixed race person join the royal family, this young woman who'd had her own career beforehand, and I'm very interested to see how they were back today for this service of Thanksgiving, and I wonder to what extent there's a certain amount of rapprochement now, because I think that the royal family does have to think about where the monarchy's going in the future, and without them, actually the burden is on a very few shoulders.
And shoulders that don't quite understand. I mean, if Meghan and Harry had gone to the Caribbean, I can guarantee you that the reception would have been very different, because they kind of understand. She understands.
Because it's part of her own heritage.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have been so embarrassing that, some of the tone-deaf
interactions.
And
this is a good point to bring up, because we are, as I said, potentially at a point of transition, and the royal family must know this. There's a danger that at this point, perhaps unlikely at the moment, the UK says, actually, we don't want to carry on with monarchy. But certainly other parts of the world are doing it. We've got Anthony Albanese, the new Prime Minister of Australia, appointing a minister. All right, an assistant minister. And I know everybody's sort of said it's a sop to republicanism, but it was in the Labour kind of policy position in the run-up to the election that they would support a transition to a republic. We have those Caribbean islands, Caribbean nations, some of which are already broken away. Others are saying we are going to have our own head of state, no longer have the Queen. I mean, this is it's a significant moment, isn't it? Because she represents that junction from the end of empire to this moment, which could be the end of the monarchy, quite a large part of the globe.
Well, as regards this country, although Yasmin has said that there are declining numbers of people who support the monarchy, it isn't that considerable. I think what you do have is you have some people who are very vocal about republicanism, and some people, the kind who camp out for 3 days in advance of something happening in the mouth. Ardent royalists, but there's a rump in the middle who like the Queen, who like the sense of stability and continuity that it brings. And I think what's happened, we're seeing at the moment is some management going on by the government, by the royal family, to try and ensure that Charles seems to be part of that continuity and stability that his mother has represented. Things overseas are rather different, and I think we're looking towards Australia saying thanks but no thanks. But it does suggest that there will be more effort made to try and keep the Commonwealth of Nations together, because, of course, there are many countries that belong to that are republics. The Queen is not their head of state, but they still want to be. They still want to be in the Commonwealth.
But you see, I always think that the Commonwealth was a real sop, a kind of not giving up on a virtual empire, if you like. And I'm sorry, you know, everybody says the Queen hasn't put a foot wrong. Actually, she has. I think to insist, as she did 2 years ago, that Charles should inherit her place was wrong, because the Commonwealth was ready then to elect its own person. And they are very respectful of the Queen. But I thought that was so undemocratic. And that's my primary
objection
is that it is totally undemocratic for a person to be born into one family, to be at the top of a very class-ridden society, and therefore no other child born in the same minute has that privilege. And that principle is deeply undemocratic.
I think
and yet
also
we have a democracy that thrives in this country alongside
well, yes and no.
Alongside
yes and no.
the monarchy.
Yes and no, because a lot of the informal powers that are taken by Charles, actually, you remember the spider letters.
These were letters he wrote when he was younger to government
influence, so, you know, that the Queen has managed to negotiate with the government, I think it was Cameron, that the royal family is exempt from FOI, freedom of information. How is this okay in a democracy?
And where they can't even mention the monarchy in the House of Commons. You know,
Yeah.
I think Keir Starmer was actually reprimanded a few months ago.
The Labour leader for doing so.
Correct.
I just wanted to pick up on exactly that point, Catherine. Just this week we had a cabinet minister, the culture secretary, talking about the Jubilee celebrations. When she was asked a particular question about an individual member of the royal family, she said, "We're not allowed to talk about that." Similarly, the finances of the royal family are opaque. And there's also this question about these powers, which I think you were alluding to. On 2 occasions, the Queen summoned somebody to form a government. There have been 2 occasions in her career already where there's been some debate over which party leader she should summon. And in a sense, that's a real political power, which has to be exercised with great caution. You might argue was done, but it's a power beyond, in a sense, the democratic system.
Well, I think when it comes to prime ministers, that on occasions when there's been a problem, it's actually been more of an issue of what those politicians have been saying and doing. I don't know if you were referring there to
February 74 and 2010.
Well, I was thinking more that actually the one that's really the most serious is 63.
Yeah.
when Macmillan stood down for health reasons.
And there wasn't an election, a general election.
There wasn't a general election, and it was all a bit of a muddle.
Yeah.
And he effectively recommended to her that she ask Douglas Hume to replace him. But there was a whole group of people who wanted it to be Rab Butler, and she went for Hume. And it seemed on that occasion that it was more the problems caused by the then set-up in the Conservative Party, rather than her saying, I must have Hume because I want Hume. And I think that 74 and 2010, with those attempts by Heath and Brown to form governments, but stay in office, were more of their making than hers.
That's a fair criticism. The point is a fair one, but recalling 2010, huge efforts were made behind the scenes between Downing Street and the Palace to agree the protocols, to draw up a document, and all of this was kind of hidden from the public. And it says commentators talked about it, but we weren't allowed to see it. Nobody codified what the rules were. So it was almost like a gentleman's agreement. And I wonder at the beginning of the 21st century how people would feel about that if we had, at the next general election, a really contested election where we might have 1 or 2 seats between the two big parties.
The issue there is probably that maybe we need a written constitution more than anything.
Yeah, an unwritten constitution is great until you actually need to find the rules to govern things. And then a written constitution has its own pitfalls, as we see in my country.
As you're seeing again right now, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I understand that, there is this urge for countries to have a unifying figure, someone who seems to be beyond politics, who can really rally the nation in times of great need or crisis. And that happens in other countries. There are elected presidents or otherwise chosen heads of state who are not part of a dynasty that we see here. And
although there are 1 or 2 where they are, where they can feel almost dynastic.
That's true. And also, I was once based in South Asia and saw 2 monarchies fall. I mean, one, it was a Republican revolution that got rid of an unelected dynast in Nepal, and in Bhutan it was actually a king who said, it's time for me to give up absolute power and for this to become a constitutional monarchy. But that is the way of the world, is heading towards democracy, although of course we see setbacks.
When India became independent, the minute it became independent, it declared itself a republic, and it got rid of all the Maharajas, who were very autocratic and incredibly wealthy, gave them a palace each. And did that stop the tourists from visiting? No. It made it into a modern state. Now, I understand that people say, do you want, Trump then? No, this is a model of a titular head. Like you have in Ireland, you had the wonderful Mary Robinson, for example, who was elected, and after her time was done, somebody else was elected. I can imagine David Attenborough being a wonderful president of the United Kingdom. Could you not?
Yes. It's a good thought, actually. We'll make a note and save that one for when the time comes.
The point about the monarchy was made very well by the late Duke of Edinburgh, when somebody once said to him, how long do you think the monarchy will last? And he said, as long as you want us. So they can envisage a time when they won't be in the position they're in, but if we don't want them anymore, we've got to work out cogently what we're going to have in its place and how we're going to unravel this, because we've had the setup we've had for such a long time. Unless you want a bloody revolution, actually dismantling it is going to be a considerable job.
Well, you could just start by looking at the system. Just because something has been around for a long time is not a good reason not to properly examine it and see, what else could be more democratic, fairer, and more palatable.
But I take your point, Catherine, in that it is so woven into British life, public life, whether it's the honour system or whatever, this is everywhere, that to actually untangle it will be quite a task. It doesn't mean you don't try if you're so inclined. You can try to do this, but we saw that might have helped sink it in Australia when they had a referendum in 1999. There was no good agreement as to what would actually replace it, and I think that also hurt the chances of that happening. And so to thoroughly overhaul a system, you need to have a plan
But we also need the media to be less fawning and to really ask the tough questions, the same questions they ask of politicians. What seems to me, you know, why did the Queen award Andrew all these multiple medals? Each time you saw him, his mum had given him another medal. We need more interrogation. You know, you have these special royal correspondents, who leave their critical faculties behind, whereas a science correspondent or an environment correspondent or a legal correspondent is expected to give you both sides, to examine, forensically explain. We need to get to that point, I think.
Let's talk a bit more in the last few minutes about, because Henry raised it, and it's a very good point there. Well, 2 points, actually. We'll come to the one about the rest of the world in a moment, if we can. But just very quickly on this question of transition. This used to be a really nervous time for monarchs, didn't it, when an old king or queen was coming to the end of their life, because they worried that at that point another member of their enormous family from some other branch would turn up and say, actually, we think our claim is bigger than the claim of the next person you've lined up. It's not quite the same now, but presumably there is still an issue about why it passes the way it does. The Queen got it because her uncle had it, and he then abdicated, and his brother picked up, and then it went through her line. Presumably there are other, I mean, the Duke of Kent's line, there are all kinds of people presumably who could say, actually, our claim is better than, if you have a hereditary system, our claim is better than that bloke's claim. Well,
you mentioned Bonnie Prince Charlie earlier, and there are certain people who think his descendants should be brought back, but they're a minority. I don't think there is quite that claim. I think that if there is a nervousness around, it will be about the extent to which Charles will be fully accepted. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not just to do with the Republican feelings that Yasmin's been talking about. I think that's an issue about who he is, and that some people aren't that well inclined.
And because we no longer accept the idea of the divine right of kings, I mean, which we effectively cut a king's head off, or you can argue about the details of the English Civil War, but it was an element of, we no longer accept that principle. And therefore, presumably, the guarantee for him isn't there.
Well, indeed. But I think it's, if there is nervousness, it's more to do with, is he fully accepted? And again, I found it extremely interesting that the Queen made a comment in her accession anniversary statement earlier this year about how much she wished to see Camilla become the Queen consort, not somebody strangely on the sidelines. Yeah. It did feel like a bit of management of the process, trying to ensure that Camilla is accepted, because if the Queen gives Camilla her imprimatur, it's harder for others to object. But I think what will happen when we see a new monarch is that prior to any coronation, if they have one, of that monarch, we're going to get opinion polls, I would think, about them.
Millions of people have never forgotten Diana. You know, they've wiped her out of history, but actually...
Prince Charles' first wife, who died in a car accident.
And that's why Camilla being installed again by the Queen, kind of given this, I think is to misread how many people really feel passionately that Diana was wronged.
I think that's true, but I think that has somewhat faded. No. It's not as strong as it once was. And now, interestingly, the Prince of Wales has been married to his second wife for longer than he was married to Diana. So I think, if you like, they've had time on their side. I think she's been bedded in as this member of the royal family. There are people who still feel as you're suggesting, Yasmin, but I don't think it's quite as powerful as it once was.
Henry, I just wanted to, as we close, talk very briefly about the rest of the world. It's a bit unfair, but this weekend of all weekends, this is very much domestic-focused edition of Dateline, unusual for us. But I was just going to, just on that, you gave a great example of Asia, where you've got monarchies who voluntarily gave up, monarchies who were deposed. We have a monarchy that's proving very supportive in Thailand of the military junta there that seized power from a democracy. I mean, it just an observation observation from you, perhaps, on the uses and abuses of monarchy internationally?
Right, having a monarch is no guarantee of either the good or the evil of a monarchy. You do have Thailand, where they're in support of a military dictatorship. On the other hand, although he was an embarrassment a few years ago, the king in Spain, Juan Carlos, actually helped transition that country to democracy from fascism. And so there have been examples of good kings and queens and bad kings and queens. But as
and sometimes it's the same person.
Correct. Exactly. Exactly. But they are not elected, and there is no way to get rid of them unless it is a bloody revolution or some other kind of mechanism that a few countries have managed to actually successfully do in a bloodless way. So you cannot get rid of these kings and queens very easily, and I think that's what we're seeing is a problem.
I've got 30 seconds. Yasmin, how much longer will it last as an institution, do you think, in this country?
It will, one generation, I think.
Catherine?
Well, I said the Prince of...
Very briefly.
The Duke of Edinburgh said, as long as you want us, but it's also, of course, as long as they want to do it. And will younger generations want to do it?
Great thoughts made on Catherine Peppers, Yasmin Alabai-Brown, Henry Chu. Thank you all very much. Yasmin in particular, thank you very much for soldiering on through your discomfort. Very
love your programme so much.
Bless you. Thank you very much. I hope you love it too at home. That's Dateline London for this week. If you do, please come back again same time next week. Goodbye.